Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined once again by Rav Yehoshua Hartman, who is the Rice-based Medrash of Hasmonean in London, and he's also the editor, or really machaber, of the footnotes of the Sifrei Maharal, published by Machon Yerushalayim. And so a previous episode, it was a while ago, so if listeners aren't familiar, we discussed the full kind of biography of the Maharal and his Svarim. This episode, we're going to be discussing the Maharal Shabbos HaGadol Derasha. This is Hartman published this last year, big, pretty massive volume of the Maharal Shabbos HaGadol Derasha, and it's the first volume of the planned future publication of other drashas of Maharal. So, thank you, Rav Hartman, for joining me once again.
Shalom Aleichem, Nachi. Great to be here.
Okay, so let's jump right into this drasha. It's one drasha of the Maharal. Tell the listeners about the drasha. When was this given? When was it written? What's going on here?
It's really remarkable. It was said in the year of 1589, which is Shin Mem Tet. It was published 6 weeks later as a book on its own. If you know in those days how the publishing was done, to publish a whole sefer in 6-7 weeks, and one of those 7-8 weeks is a whole week of Pesach. It came out 6-7 weeks later. I guess the Zrizus of Mitzrayim is chal also on this drasha, and all what this drasha is about. And it's really remarkable from many different ways. First of all, the people in the shul that year that he spoke, they didn't eat shalshudas. I mean, they didn't go home. It's hundreds of sources. Forget about the footnotes. Just the Maharal itself. It's hundreds of sources. At least it takes at least 6 hours to say it. I mean, if you speak regular speed, the Chofetz Chaim measured that you could say 200 words per minute. It would take 5-6 hours. How could people listen to 5-6 hours on a drasha on Shabbos? What about Sudas Shabbos? What about Shabbos Shlaf? I don't know. It's very possible that he added a lot when he wrote it over. Meaning, we don't know exactly what did he say and what he added. Is it verbatim for what he said? For sure not, because it was said on Shabbos. So it's not. It's very possible, though, that once he was writing it on Motzei Shabbos or something like that, he expanded beyond what he said in Shul.
Now, also interestingly, first of all, the title of the Sefer, the original, it's interesting. It's Drush No Meshubach Shel Yehuda ben Betzal b'Parshas Tzav Shabbos HaGadol Shin Mem Tes. That's what it says on the Sharblat here, which you have reproduced with one sample page in the new edition. But this is the only Shabbos HaGadol Derasha. So not only was this said and printed 6 weeks later, the Maharal lived a very, very, very long life. It was the only one we have of his.
It's a pella also what you're asking. I pointed out in the introduction, what happened to all the other Drashos Shabbos HaGadol? What happened to them? He was a Rav in Prague. He was a Rav in other cities. What happened to them? How come this is the only one that was kept? And you have the same question in Shabbos Tshuva. I mean, he has a drasha, a phenomenal drasha in Shabbos Tshuva. And that's the next thing probably I'll be involved in. And it's very important because we don't have the sperm of the Maharal on Yom Kippur. So any insights of the Maharal on Yom Kippur, and we don't have Chidushei Agodas and Yuma. So that's really where he speaks about Yom Kippur. And it's the only one that we have. The Shabbos Tshuva, they said that year in Shin Mem Dalet. What happened to all the other Shabbos Tshuva drashas? I don't know. Is there a possibility that maybe he compiled a few drashas of a few years together in one? Maybe. But here, let's say Drush Shabbos HaGadol. It says he said it in Shin Mem Tes, which is again 1589. Maybe once he started writing it, he also included in it all the drashas they said up to that period of time from previous years. I checked around. I asked scholars that are supposed to know these things. No one really looked into this point. I guess they found the one drasha so overwhelming that maybe it would be too much. They have a few other drashas.
I guess there's no way to know this, but you being an expert on the Maharal, he Mistama didn't say the same drasha every year, right? Do you assume that he said different Torah every year?
For sure. His whole mahus is chidush. His whole mahus is No, he definitely just, no, for sure not. And he was a Rav many years in the same shul. They say, it says in Pirkei Avos, Marbe Yeshiva, Marbe Chochma, which means, Pshuta Shemikra, if you sit in a place for a long time, you become a Chacham. But it's also understood maybe that if you're a Rav in one shul for many years, you have to come up with different drushes. If you change shuls every 2 years, so you can repeat the same drushes. So for sure, the Maharal that was a Rav in Prague for many years and a Rav in Krakow for many years, for sure he said, and why should he repeat himself when he has so much what to say? Like why should he limit himself to only one drasha? It's a pella. It's a pella. What happened to? Why is this the only one that's left over for the subsequent diras? I don't have a clue on that one.
Yeah, and for sure, and even more so because what you're saying, it was published right away, 6 weeks later, which is really, really, really fast for those days. And even now, it takes like longer to print the safer than that. And then that's it.
For example, my next volume, which is coming out of Yetz Hashem in a few weeks, it's Drush ala Torah. The drush that the Maharal gave for Shavuos 3 years later in Shin Nun Beis, and it came out a year later. So the printing took a whole year. So again, I guess what we said before, Pesach, everything has to do with Zrizus, so it was printed immediately. Shavuos already, maybe not. But it's a mystery. I wonder if there's any way, Anachi, to find this out. I wonder if there's any way to check out how come the other drushes were not written down.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We have only one of each. But we'll talk more about the other drushes. But something that you mentioned was that Shabbos Tshuva, we also have just one drasha, and there, that's Pashat the only thing we have in Yuma. However, here, on Yom Kippur, right, you said we don't have that Shabbos in Yuma, you're correct. Here, we have Gvuras Hashem. So we have from the Maharal and Pesach, plenty. So let's talk about the Tariq and the Show. We can talk about Gvuras, your addition of Gvuras Hashem perhaps a little bit after, but what is kind of unique? What does he do in this drasha, especially that he differs from Gvuras Hashem?
Again, that's a wonderful question. But what you'll see is that this drasha is focusing, I would say at least 50% of it on Parshas Tzav, because that Shabbos was Parshas Tzav. And he asks 19 questions on the Parsha. And he goes into the Korbanos mentioned in the Parsha. To a certain degree, Pesach and Inyane Pesach are not the main dagesh, emphasis in the Sefer. Yes, usually Rosh Shabbos HaGadol means about Pesach, and there are tremendous chidushim regarding matzahs and Pesach that we'll speak about soon, but it's not the center of the drasha. The center are the parshas in Tzav, meaning the different korbanos, and then he speaks at the end about learning Mishnayos and other issues and topics. But Pesach itself, I see, it's divided to 32 inyanim. Inyan Hey is about Korban Pesach, and then Inyan Kav Gimel is about Kav Dal is about Inyanim Matzah and Pesach. Surprisingly, the focus is not Pesach, to the degree that I remember last year when it came out right before Pesach, one of the people that bought it told me, I bought this sefer, and I started looking at it, I saw it's all about Tzav. It's not so much about Pesach. So there are chidushim about Pesach, of course, but it's not the focus of the drasha. With your permission, Nachi, I would like to point out one interesting nekuda that he says la halacha, which is again Inyan Kafhei, which about matzah Pesach, and there he says a chiddush that's brought down in the name of the Maharal, but not quoting this drasha. What is the chiddush? He speaks about Korban Toida, which is mentioned in Parshat Tzav, and then he says we do 3 matzahs on Leila Seder. It's maybe corresponding to the 3 kinds of matzahs that Korban Toida had. Not that we're doing it as Korban Toida. That's what the Rosh says. He proves it's not the point. But then he says that by the Toida, the quantity of the chametz was equal to the quantity of the matzah, but the matzahs were divided to 3 small portions, and the chametz was 1 big portion. Says the Maharal, you know why? Because the smaller, it's safer. That should become chametz. And then he comes up with what we call today, but I think it's the first one to say it, called Tanur Rishon. There's a special churma to eat the matzah of Tanur Rishon. The Maharal doesn't call it Tanur Rishon, but the Maharal paskins la'alocha that you can't just have an oven that was heated up in the beginning of the morning and then just do one round after another of matzahs without reheating the matzah. He says, you know how come the Torah divided the matzahs of the lachmi toida into small. Okay, what's that? The Maharal understands the fact that the Torah divided the matzahs into three small portions is a message here that it has to be small quantities and that gets heated up immediately. If it's a big portion, it won't get heated up. And then, as a result of that, the Maharal goes on saying, "Umipnei kach ani omer, ma she'olam noagim k'ofina matzot b'tanur." But the olam is knowing that you bake the matzahs in the oven, achar kach motziim otam, and then you take out the first load, v'notnim acherim b'mkomam, and you put other ones instead. V'lo yasiku hatanur, they don't reheat the tanur again. Lefi hanireh ein nachon kach klal. That's wrong. Ki eino nafah miyad. It won't get baked immediately if it's not at its peak heat. The kama chumrot ichmiru b'afiyas hamatzah yoter mizeh. There's other chumras which seem even more far-fetched. So why don't we do this chumrah? Make sure that the oven is always boiling and reheat it every time again anew. And here comes the idea of Tanur Rishon. And then he says, what's the shear? For sure you agree that after 10, 20, 25 rounds, it will cool off. So where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? And therefore he says, every time you put in the matzahs again to the oven, you have to reheat the oven and make sure it's boiling hot like the first time. And this is where people get this hanaga of Tanur Rishon. What's so special with Tanur Rishon? That it's boiling hot. Now this halacha is brought down by the poskim in the name of the Maharal, but not from Derasha Shabbos HaGadol. I haven't found anybody quoting the Derasha Shabbos HaGadol. Rather, the Maharal has annotations on the Tur. And on the Tur, Siman Samach Zayin, there he adds it as a side mark. What did the Tur speak over there in Siman Samach Zayin? Nothing to do with Pesach. But it's speaking about over there that if there's a liquid, a vinegar, that you put the meat in to get the blood out, that's the vinegar. Don't use the same vinegar again for the next round of meat. Use fresh vinegar. Says the Maharal then there, I think the same should be happening also with matzahs. That just like the vinegar has to be refreshed every time you use it, the oven has to be relit every time. That is brought down to halacha. Many points can bring this down. Some agree, some disagree, but no one. The Pri Megadim brings it down, but he says the oilam is not noig like that, and the Masham brings it down. But Al Kopanim, no one brings it down from the first Shabbos HaGadol. They bring it from that annotation on the Tur Yoredea Siman Samach Zayin. That is a tremendous chidush la'alacha, and here comes the custom of Tanur Rishon in Yerushalayim. I lived in Yerushalayim for many, many years. Tanur Rishon is really something that people want. They're probably not even aware why, but it comes from here.
It's interesting you say that no one quotes it from this drasha. Do you know which was published first?
For sure, the drasha came out first because the annotations on the Maharal were published like 200 years after he died.
On the Torah.
But I think a simple answer is the annotations on the Tur. Tur is people learn Tur. It's halacha. So the hagoyes of the Maharal on the Tur are more accessible than a sefer like Rosh Shabbos HaGadol. So it is the Maharal's chiddush, and he said it here in the drasha, but it's not quoted from here. It's quoted from his hagoyes on the Tur.
Now, I want to get back to more examples, and then it talks a little bit more about Pesach, and we'll mention some of the things that he talked about in the drasha, like you said, that are not about Pesach, but just stylistically, how does this say for how similar or different is it than the Maharal's other svarim? The fact that it's a drasha. So this question really goes on all the drashas. So your future Mitchell will do future podcasts and the future drashas. How do they compare the drashas versus the regular svarim?
An excellent question. And there's definitely a style of the Maharal and the drashas which do not appear in the svarim. I think, first of all, he is more poetic in the drashas. He quotes like psukim and a lashon, neifel lashon, and poetic. He does, in my humble opinion, explain the concepts a little bit more than he does in this one. Due to the fact that he's speaking to a shul, and people in the shul, they're not necessarily all tremendous Talmidei Chachamim. And I'll tell you, Nachim, when people ask me which part of the Maharal to start with, it's a question I'm being asked already for over 30 years. Which one to start with? It's a tough question. I think last time we said the Gur'ayah, select the parts, and so on. But now that I see it, I would say the drashas. The drashas, the Maharal is taking into account that the listener, the reader, may not be so familiar with his style. And you might see it b'chush that he tries again to explain from this angle, from that angle, and to try to bring it down more to the people, to a layman's level. Again, a layman in the days of the Maharal is not a layman of today, but there's definitely an effort to make it more understood.
Now, how does it compare to other drashas? The Eilis Ephraim, the Kli Yakar, at the same time, right after him. Like that's one example of a drasha from another person from Prague, another gadol from Prague. How does the Maharal's drasha? I don't know if you compared this, but how does the Maharal's drasha compare to something like that?
I'll tell you the truth, Nachi. I can't really answer it because I don't know enough about the styles of the other ones. To be honest, you remind me in my Chumash lessons, and I say I'm a Chumash teacher for the last 45 years. When I ask young students when they're 14, 15 years old, what's unique about Rashi in comparison to all the other Mefarshim, the Ramban, the Sforno, the Ibn Ezra, and so on? And they all start saying all kinds of svaras. In the 35 years or 40 years of teaching Chumash, not once did a Talmud get up and say, listen, Rabbi, I didn't learn the Ramban and the Sforno and the Ibn Ezra, so I don't know how to compare to the other ones. It did not happen once. And the truth is that most of them did not learn Ramban, Ibn Ezra before the age of 15, 16. They did not. But no one ever answered. Once Rav Hutner Zatzal told me that if it would have been up to him, that's what he said, he would recommend that 6, 7, 8-year-olds should learn Chumash dafka from a Mikrois Gdoilis, not a Chumash Rashi only. Let him understand that when he's learning Chumash Rashi, first of all, there's many other commentators on the Torah, and he should also understand this he spoke a lot, that whatever you know, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So when you see 25 different Mefarshim on the page, and you're learning a few lines in Rashi, you understand, hey, whatever I'm doing is just the tip of the iceberg, and there's so much more to learn. And there's other commentators. So again, if to be honest, I do not know. I do look at the Eilis Ephraim from time to time. I do. I look up there's a much later Drashas Hatzlach, who lived in Prague, but it's over 150 years later. I did learn pretty much the Drashas Hatzlach, but to say that I could figure what's the derech of the Maharal and how is it different, I could just tell you though there's similarities. It's asking about like 20 questions in the beginning, and that the Eilis Ephraim does as well, to ask 20 questions and to start answering. But many, many questions. Again, Nachi, I'm sure you heard that someone said he became an apikoros. They asked him, Nebuch, why did you become an apikoros? Because of the Abarbanel. Why? Because the Abarbanel starts every parsha with 25 questions. He said, I saw the questions and fell asleep. Saw the questions and fell asleep. So I just remained with the kashas. That style does exist. It's a commonality with the Maharal's drashas. He asks 19 questions b'basachas or 40 questions b'basachas. That he does do, and that was the common way how to do it in those days.
By the way, as someone that I enjoy the Abarbanel, I will say his questions. Listeners are familiar. Should read the questions because they're very geshmak. And then even if he does alleviate the questions are very geshmak. Another thing about the just to clear up, we mentioned Elazar 5 also has other drushes, if say das, he has other drushes. But okay, so let's go back to the Maharal's drusha. So how does he start off the drusha? Right away, you mentioned there's 32 in Yanim, which you have it as on a index right in the beginning, but then also each drusha, there's like a page before each one, and the Sefer where it says Inyan Aleph. So this one is a kol niver l'kavod Hashem, niver sheniver la'atzmai, and then there's like a little more subtitle explanation. But how does he start off how did he start off the drasha?
Again, very good point. The beginning of the drasha is Pesachdik, namely a major theme of Pesach, even though he is not specific in speaking about Pesach. But like he explained in verse Hashem over and over, that's the night that we became Avdei Hashem. On Leil Seder, we were born. That's a concept that he mentions in this drasha as well. And we were born as Avdei Hashem. And then the beginning of the drasha starts with a medrash that everything was created for Koved Hashem. And nothing was created for itself. And there he goes into explaining this concept, which is a Hasidic concept, but I think he's the first one to say it in such a clear way. The pasuk that says, "Ve'adat hayom ki Hashem Elokim b'shamayim ma'am v'la'aretz b'tachas ein od." What do the two words "ein od" mean? The Mefarsher Amikra explained, "Ein od" means there's no other God. The Hasidim, the Sifra Hasidus explained, and the Nefesh Chaim says it as well. Ein od means there's no other reality but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only no other God, no other reality, and the Shlomo Kadosh says it over and over. But again, as far as I saw, the first one to say it so clearly is the Maharal. And in that beginning of the drasha of Shabbos HaGadol, he quotes the pasuk "Ve'adat hayom v'shavas avecha ki Hashem Elokim b'shamayim ma'avod v'naf in oid," and then he says on page Dalet, "Ve'ein pirush ein od ki ein od Elohim." It does not mean there's no other God. That's pashat. Aval pirusho ki ein od davar ba'olam rak Hashem yisbarach. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the only true Metzius reality. Now, what about Nibraim? Ki kol ha'Nibraim lo nibru el leman yisbarach. They were all created for the sake of Hashem. V'im lo ken lo haya nibrot o nibra. רק הכל נברא בשביל לשבח ולפאר יוצרו ולא עובדו. ולפיכך אומר, אין עוד. כלומר, כי אין בריה עוד בנמצא. Nothing was created independently from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything was created to shed a light on Hashem. That's what the words ein od mean. As far as I know, the first one to say it so clearly is the Maharal. The Shlach says it afterwards. The Sifri Hasidus say it afterwards. The Baal HaTanya speaks about it. But the first one to say that Ein Od means there's no other reality but HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's the only true Metzius. That's the Maharal. And this is the Kuda, that there's nothing but Hashem in the world, is really the difference between a Yid and a Goy. And the Maharal alludes to it a little bit in his other Svarim. The Goyim also have a relationship with the Kodesh Baruch Hu. And they keep Shemitz Ben Noach, according to the Rambam in one place, they'll make it to Olam Haba if they're tzaddikim. But they're not living for Hashem. They have their own life. And they pay their taxes, so to speak, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like in England, everybody respects the Queen or the King. You pay the taxes, you follow the laws of the country. But no one will say, I'm living for the Queen. I'm living for the King. No, I'm not. I'm living for myself. And I have my obligations, taxes that I pay to the government. Comes the Maharal says, by Am Yisrael, it's not like that. It's not that we have our own life, and then chutz mizeh, we pay our Kodesh Baruch Hu our obligations. The title of the book, All for the Boss, is a Jewish concept that only Yidden have. Look, Racham, and Sefer Yeshua, when she told the two Rakim, what she say? Yadanu asher hovish Hashem meyamzu, Hashem Elokim b'shamayim imal, v'ala oretz mitachas. She did not say the next two words, ein od. She stopped right before that. Chazal already pointed out. And Rabbi Shapiro said, always I heard from it more than once. a goy cannot say an od. It will be just lip service if we'll say it. Ein od means the halacha l'maisa. Everything what you do, you should do l'shem shamayim. It's a simon in the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Lamed Aleph and Orach Chaim. Kol ma'asecha you l'shem shamayim. Everything. You know how Rav Yehoshua once told me this concept? I was too young to appreciate it then, but now when we play it again. There's no Switzerland between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Switzerland means neutral. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like telling you, listen, that's none of my business. That, when you go to work in the office from 9 to 5, keep the halachas, for sure. But what you do, the etzem from 9 to 5, that's none of my business. When you come to Daven Shachas Min Chamarim, that's what I'm interested in. No, there's no Switzerland between us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And again, Rav Yehoshua, I'm saying, quoting again Rav Yehoshua on this point, he once told me, you know what's the difference between the Jewish religious philosophers and the non-Jewish religious philosophers? And he knew both, so he could compare. He said the non-Jewish religious philosophers, what was the question that they spend their life on? In our world, what role does God play? Because there is a God, they believe, they're religious. But the world seems to function on its own. So what role does Hashem play in our world? The Jewish religious philosophers, their question was, in the world of Hashem, what role do we play? And Jewish religious philosophers, it's this Maharal, Shabbos HaGadol brings it out. Everything's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he's the only thing that counts. And he really doesn't need us. So what role do we play? That's a murder concept. But that's, by non-Jews, this question doesn't exist. Adram, the question's the opposite. What role does Hashem play in our world?
Now this segues right into Inyan Beis, which is the second point, which is I'll read the titles. I call Nivra L'Shavech Hashem, B'Keitzara Bracha Hu He Pidyin.
I must tell you what the Maharal says there. And the Maharal says the same idea in the Siva Avodah Perek Yudalet. And once I gave a share in it, and a man who was like 45, 50 years old, he was from, but parv. He said, if someone would have told me this Maharal when I would have been a teenager, it would have changed my whole life. I don't know exactly what he got so excited about. But what did he say? The Maharal explains over there, what does a bracha do? So the Gemara says in brachas, before you eat it, it's Hashem ha'aretz u'mloya. After the bracha, Nachi, ask most adults that you know, what function does a bracha do? They'll tell you it's like going to the candy man in shul and say, can I please get a candy? And if you say it very nicely, you'll get a candy. So when you want to eat an apple or any kind of fruit or any kind of food, for that matter, you got to say first, please Hashem, can I have it? And Hashem will say yes, and you could have it. That's very good for 5-year-olds. Is that really what bracha is about? Does it say in the bracha, can I please have the apple? What are you saying in the bracha? In the bracha, you're acknowledging that Hashem created the apple. You're not asking permission. You're not saying, can I please have it? So really, what role does the bracha do? And the Gemara says it's poida, it's opinion, that before it's hegdesh, and now it comes out to chulin after the bracha. How does a bracha become a pidyon? Says the Maharal here in Shabbos HaGadol, and the same in the Siva Avodah Perek Yudalet. Why can't you eat an apple without a bracha? Why not? It's hegdish. In what way is it hegdish? Because Hashem created it? Could be, but there's more to it. The apple and everything in the Bria is engaged in praising Hashem. The apple gets its right color, right everything at the right time. It's sweet, it's tasty, it's praising Hashem. Because you're hungry, could you cut short the praise of Hashem? The apple's engaged in praising Hashem. How could you cut it short? Because you want to eat it. You're stopping the Beethoven in the middle. You can't do that. But when you come with your bracha and with your koach hadibur, and you praise Hashem and you acknowledge that Hashem created this apple, and by thus praising Him, The apple now could retire. It has reached, like in ways, you have reached your destination. The apple could retire. What was the purpose of the apple in the world? To praise Hashem. But then I was praising Hashem in a subtle way, in a quiet way. And now it's praising Hashem that a person came with this free will and with Koach HaDibur, and it's praising Hashem. The apple will never reach such a height on its own. And therefore, now you could finish off the apple because it reached its destination. That's what a bracha does. It uplifts it from saying, "Can I please have an apple? Thank you very much," to a pidyon means a substitute. That's what the word pidyon means. You have to offer a substitute. Tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem Beis Hamikdash will be built. You go to the Gizbar Hegdesh, the treasurer, and you can make a bracha on an animal that's running around there. Could you take it? No. It will be me'ilah. So how can a bracha work by an apple? Because whatever made it Hegdesh till now is being substituted by the bracha that you're saying.
Wow, amazing. So I want to jump a little forward. There's some more. He has some more here. So first of all, just one thing on the Sefer. There's an Inyan, like I said, you have it in the beginning, listed the 32 Inyanim, and then before beginning of each Perek almost, it's Inyan Hey. These Inyanim were originally there, or you added these Inyanim here?
No. By the Maharal, it's just one big drasha. Dividing it to 32 Inyanim, I took the liberty to do it. I hope, listen, many people tell me that when I reach my 120, the Maharal will come and receive me. I'm not so sure they're right. And it could be, maybe the Maharal will come and say, "Who gave you the rishus to play around with my svarim? Do you think my svarim are hefker?" But I don't know. I have a pach like that. I think, though, the golem will come and say hello. Then I think very good chance.
The non-existent golem that we talked about him last time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So, but it's definitely easier to quote when you have these inyanim to have a conversation about it. So, you mentioned already one Inyan Chafei, which talks about Pesach and Halacha. Another one here, just looking Inyan Hey, Carbon Pesach Moira L'Shabbat Chelki Adam Achdos Hashem. So, talking about Carbon Pesach. So, there's another one that does talk about Pesach.
Absolutely. So, meaning that the Hagdama is about being an Eved Hashem, and Carbon Pesach. That the Maharal says again in Gvurus Hashem Perek Lamed Vav and Gvurus Hashem Perek Samach, that if you see there's a common theme in all the halachas of Korban Pesach. The bais echad ya'achel. Don't break it. Don't break the bones. The etzanot tishberu bo. Don't cook it in water. Rather roast it. These are all bringing out 1, 1, 1, 1. All the halachas of Pesach are echoing. The animal has to be 1 year old. Don't divide it amongst the chaburas. It's all echoing the concept of echad, and that's what the Maharal is saying, that Korban Pesach is bringing out the first service that Am Yisrael offered HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and it's all echoing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the whole world is echad, and that you should subjugate everything, especially all the parts of a human being, and beyond, towards Avodas Hashem. But here comes an interesting point. In the same drasha of Shabbos HaGadol, the Maharal says later on that a korban reflects the makriv. The classical example is Minchas Soita. She behaved in an inappropriate way, so you bring Sa'orim, which is Machal Behema. So, and by Korban Pesach, it's reflecting that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one. So how do you reconcile these two concepts, both said in Rosh Shabbos HaGadol? The one is the Korban Pesach reflects that Hashem is one, and two, that the Korban has to reflect its makriv, the one who's offering it, which is not Hashem, which is Adam. That's a little contradiction here. But like if you go a little bit into it, you see Adrabah. The fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one is the ultimate identity of Am Yisrael. Am Yisrael were created to tell the world not only that there is a God, but that He's one. So what Korban Pesach is showing, it's a reflection of our identity. Our identity is that there's nothing in the world but Hashem. For example, if you think about it, the pasuk Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So let's ask our listeners, what role do the first two words play? Shema Yisrael, what role is it? Does it mean, hey you? Hey you, I gotta tell you something. That's what it means? It's translated in English, Hear, O Israel. Do you say that also in any other mitzvahs? Shema Yisrael, keep Shabbos. Shema Yisrael, put on tefillin. Dafka here you say Shema Yisrael. But the pshat is, it's Tuch Am Yisrael. Through Am Yisrael, we see that Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Like we say in Mincha Shabbos, Ato Echad, V'Shimcha Echad, Umi Ka'amcha Yisrael, Goy Echad Ba'aretz. And this is a theme in all Sifrei Maharal, that the achdus of the Jewish people is coming from the achdus of Hashem. And Rashi says it in Chumash. Where does Rashi say in Chumash? That when Yaakov Avinu came down to Mitzrayim, there were 70 people, and it says Nefesh. Esav came down with 6. Esav had 6 members in his family, and it says Nafshos. It says Rashi in Parshas Vayigash, we are worshiping one God, so we're called one. Esav, they worship many gods, they're called many. But this idea that Am Yisrael is here to show that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one is a big yesod of the Maharal, and that's where he speaks about Korban Pesach. You know, in fact, with your Rishus Nachi, I want to go off just a tangent. I want to tell you something that happened with. I was in Prague together with Ramesh Shapir Zatzal. We were 3 people. Ramesh Shapir Zatzal, my friend David Schnell, Rabbi David Schnell from Chicago, and myself. This was in the early 90s. So it's 30 years ago. And Moshe said one morning, we went to Prague for 2 or 3 days, and one of those mornings Moshe said, let's go to Auschwitz. Really? How do you get from Prague to Auschwitz? I don't know. Let's find a way to do it. The only way to do it is by taxi. Okay, it's an 8-hour journey. Fine. So we went into the taxi, and we reached Auschwitz at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was just then open for the public. Like, you know, it's right after communism fell. And then when we came out, my friend David Schnell said some kind of remark which triggered Moshe to say the following. He said 40 years earlier, that means in the early 50s, when I was a boch in the Chevron Yeshiva, there was one Talmud who was a genius in theatrics. And he used to make plays on Motzei Shabbos from time to time for the Chevron of the Yeshiva. He wrote it, he played it, he did everything. At one time he made the following play. That a Yid, one of the 6 million, came up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and he heard that everybody's talking about Gan Eden and Olam Haba. The voice asked him, what would you like? He said, I would like Gan Eden and Olam Haba. So the voice told him, okay, there's just a questionnaire that we have to fill. We're going to process it very quickly, and then you'll go to Gan Eden and Olam Haba. Here were the questions. Did you keep Shabbos? The Yid answers, no. Did you put on tefillin? No. Did you eat matzah and Leil Seder? No. Did you fast on Yom Kippur? No. Were you circumcised? No, I came from a total assimilated family. Did you do anything Jewish? No. What would you want? That was one of the questions. So Yiddish chutzpah he did have. He said, I already said what I want. I want Gan Eden and Olam Haba. So the voice tells him, Gan Eden and Olam Haba, I give to people that live the lifestyle which I subscribed in the Torah. But unfortunately, that's not what happened here. So we got a problem. So the Yiddish says, I don't understand. So the voice says, what don't you understand? He said, so the Yiddish says, I was a Jew. Hitler considered me a Jew. So here I'm not. So the boy says, ooh, I'm going to convene the heavenly court and I'll be back shortly. And then there's a debate in the heavenly court. And I give over, I want to emphasize, this is not a chazal, what I'm saying. It's not a medrash. It's what Rav Yehoshua Hartman told me coming out of Auschwitz. And there was a debate in Beis in Shalmala. And then the verdict was 2 words. And most people would never dream of putting these 2 words together. It was a clap and a verdict. Halacha ke Hitler. And all 6 million Jews enter Gan Eden and Olam Haba. That's what Moshe told me. We're used to hearing halacha ke Besila, halacha ke Rambam, halacha ke Shulchan Aruch, halacha like the Vilna Gaon, halacha like Mishnah Brura, Moshe Feinstein, or HaShulchan, lahavdil trillionei havdalas, halacha ke Hitler. And he explained to me, Rav Moshe, what he meant. I asked him to explain to me. It really connects to something which, unfortunately, we're experiencing these days as well. There was a terrorist attack about 14, 15 years ago in Yeshivat Merkaz Arab. If you remember, like 8 boys got killed. One of the boys was called Lifshitz. And his father, Zoltan Guten Stark, is a Rav Lifshitz, a Mashgiach in Yeshivat HaKotel. And he would come to listen to Rav Moshe's shiurim on Thursday nights. So Rav Moshe made it a point to go Menachem Avalon. And he told him, and all Yerushalayim spoke about what he said. I said the same thing to Mrs. Pillay a week and a half ago when I was in Eretz Yisrael on Friday. The woman that never lost 2 sons. You know what Rav Moshe told Rav Lifshitz? Your son now is in a higher place than the Chofetz Chaim. Which means, mamish the point that we're a little bit talking about over here. If a Jew lives a full life and dies in a good old ripe age, 95, 120, so of course the questions of Shabbos, Kashrus, Tefillin, Chometz, Yom Kippur are going to be crucial. But if a Jew lost his life, not because what he did, but because what he is, because he's a Yid, so then HaKadosh Baruch Hu judges him in that prison, not what he did, but what he is. And what is a Yid? There's nothing of a Yid, which is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He pumped into my neshama. That's the kedusha that every Jew carries. So Mimele, that's even in a higher level than the Chofetz Chaim, because the Chofetz Chaim, when it comes to doing, no one can compare to the Chofetz Chaim. When it comes to being, that's the neshama that we got from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the holiest thing in the world. He told me it's a Gemara Pesachim Dafnun, Haru Gelud, Ein Birya Yechola Lamod B'Mechitzasa. I told it to Mrs. Pillay, and she told me, Kacha Mara Rav Shapira? I said, yeah. Toda Rabba Shato Omer Li et zeh. But let's hope there won't be any more need to say these Divrei Nechama. That a Yid, there's nothing about him but that he represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And if he loses his life because of that, that's how HaKadosh Baruch Hu will judge him. That's like all 6 million, I'll finish this point, are called Doshim. Even though some of them might have not been Doshim in their lifetime. Okay, that's this part of the Maharal, that everything is but of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and Am Yisrael illustrates it more than anybody else.
Wow. What a story. But getting back to Maharal's drasha, so jumping ahead to Inyan Yud Aleph, similar related, he talks about Bechiras Avrav and Yonei Hashgacha, and talking about the Mitzrayim who were kaifer in the Hashgacha of Hashem.
Right. Again, to a certain degree, what the Maharal's doing here, this drasha is going to start, then I'll speak about Adam HaRishon. It's not much covering the whole history of mankind from day one to day to the Mamash Tmias Mashiach, to Canaan. But when he speaks about the Bechira of Avram, Again, this for sure is the influence of Pesach. Namely, how did the Jewish people start? Since Pesach is the birthday of Am Yisrael, so let's go to the roots of who we are and what we are, and it all starts with Avraham Avinu. And again, it's the same idea, Nuchi. The idea is, Imamish connects it. The mitzvah were called for Nashgacha, so by them it was Mizgale, and then he goes over to Avraham Avinu. And again, he asks a question, which I personally have a story with it. When I was in my 20s, I used to tutor in a yeshiva for Bali Tshuva called Machon Shlomo in Harnof. And one of the Bali Tshuva, a very clever guy, but he just literally started, asked me if I could learn with him one-on-one in the break, which I said, fine. And then I asked him, where do you want to start from? He said, from Breshis. I said, Breshis is a tough parsha. If you don't mind, let's start the next parsha. Noach. He asked me, was Noach Jewish? I said, no. Okay, if we're skipping, let's start with the Jews. Fine. So we start with Abraham. And then he asked me a question that only a Baal Tshuva could ask. An FFB would never ask it. What was the question that he asked me? Was Avraham Avinu a righteous man? So I said, of course. What did he do? What did he do? He introduced monotheism to the world. He was the pillar of kindness. Where does it say all what you're telling me? In the previous question that we skipped? No. So why is he the one chosen? What did he do? Why is it him? Now, an FFB will never ask the question because we go first to kindergarten and we have the Ganena teaching us that Avraham Avinu broke the idols and everything. And then at the age of 6, we start learning Chumash. So yeah, we know Avraham Avinu from what the Ganena told us, the kindergarten teacher. But she was quoting Chazals. In the Chumash, there's no introduction whatsoever who Avraham Avinu is. Is that the way to introduce a hero? Does that make sense? For example, why was Noach the only one saved from the flood? Because he was a tzaddik. How do you know he was a tzaddik? It says so 3 times. Was he tzaddik number 1 in the whole wide world? Yeah, someone had to be number 1. In his generation, he was number 1. So he was saved. There's some kind of minimal introduction why he deserved it. But Avraham Avinu, there's no introduction whatsoever. Why was he chosen more than anybody else? Once I understood his question, we started looking around. We found out the Ramban asked the kasha, but in the second pasuk, not the first one. So it took us a long time to find it. And the Ramban does not make the comparison to Noach. That the Maharal adds to reinforce his question. How come by Noach there's an introduction and by Abraham there isn't? And you know what the Maharal answers? God forbid if it would have said he's a tzaddik. If it would have said, Abraham, you're a tzaddik, you're being chosen. And from here to the end of the Tanakh, we're dealing with the Jewish people. It would have been terrible if it would have said, hey, Abraham, you're a tzaddik, therefore you're being chosen. Then it would be called Ava Hatluya B'davar. It's conditional. You're a tzaddik, therefore you're being chosen. And what happens if you stop being a tzaddik? You or your children? It will be nullified. But the B'chir of Am Yisrael is unconditional. Come what may. Yes, if we misbehave, we'll be punished more than anyone else. And if we will behave, we'll get rewarded more than everyone else. But that Kosh Bo is going to go ahead and say, I don't like you, I'm going to take someone else. That will never happen. You know how come that will never happen? Because Avraham Avinu was never chosen because of his deeds. So the lack of deeds will never nullify the B'chira. So why was he chosen? If it's not because of deeds, because of what? That the Maharal does not explain in Rosh Shabbos HaGadol. He does explain it in other Sfarim. But to bring out the idea that it's not pending on deeds. Now, let me make you a little test. Who do you think the Maharal is coming to exclude from? without opinion. Instead of you're asking me questions. Now I'm going to ask you questions. By saying that the Jewish people were chosen unconditionally, and it's not based on deeds, who do you think is coming to exclude from? Nochi, people are waiting. Christianity. I have at home the photocopy of the manuscript to Gvur Hashem, which Rabbi Lupyansky published. And there he says explicitly, this is the answer to Christianity. They say that since we didn't follow their prophet, whatever that means, so we all became bad boys and bad girls. And the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, I don't want anymore. I'm taking someone else. Says the Maharal, we were never chosen because of deeds. So we'll never be unchosen because of a lack of deeds. So before I answer you, how come we're not going to follow or yes, follow your prophet? But the idea that it's pending on our behavior, you're missing the boat. It never was pending on behavior. It's be'etzem.
So, being that I didn't answer your question exactly, I was going to say non-Jews. I wasn't sure if you're aiming for Christians, like what you were looking for. So,
yeah,
there's
But the Maharal in his Sfarim alludes a few times to Christianity, and it was always omitted by the censorship.
Yeah, which makes sense, being where he lived in Prague and at the time period that he was living. So, interesting, you mentioned the manuscript. So, the manuscript is the Maharal's own handwriting?
Again, it's probably not. It's written by a Talmud, but there are annotations on the manuscript, and that is very possible the handwriting of the Maharal.
Yeah, it could be we spoke about the Maharal's handwriting manuscripts last time. I don't remember, but it's very possible we did. So, getting back to the drasha now. So I don't know what else you want to mention. Obviously, you mentioned this is a drasha. If I took him 6 hours to say, so we're not going through the whole drasha here. But there are some other parts. So if you have anything you want to specifically mention, he talks about. Let me see here what he talks. He talks about ribbis. He talks about tzitzis and both the Shaykh Asiyas Mitzrayim. He talks about Gimelach Toidas. He talks about chametz. We talked about it about Pesach. He talks about, like you mentioned, the chashivas of learning Mishnayos. In here, he talks about some other things. So whatever you want to mention.
I would mention just one thing about the Mishnayos. The Tosfos Yom Tov, who was the disciple of the Talmud, of the Maharal, writes something fascinating in his introduction. And I think if today someone would write it, he would get into. There would be posters of Meir Shorim against them. You know what the Tosfos Yom Tov says there? I'm writing this commentary on the Mishnayos because my Rebbe, the Maharal, very much pushed learning Mishnayos. Fine. And then he says, what my Rebbe did for Limud Mishnayos is even greater than what Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did for Mishnayos. What? Your Rebbe is even greater than Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Who's called Rabbeinu HaKodesh? So I thought it's a typo. But then the Tosfos Yom Tov goes into the Gemara at the end of Eilu Mitzias and explains it in length. And then he sums up and says, Hu Asher Amalti. What my Rebbe did for Limud Mishnayos is like or more than Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did for Mishnayos. Why? Because just to learn Mishnayos without the Havana, that's what existed before the Maharal came. But the Maharal said to learn Mishnayos with a little bit of Havana. That's like I'm writing my commentary, which is the Havana, the questions, the answers, because I want to bring out what my Rebbe established and gave over to Am Yisrael for learning Mishnayos. You should know that the Tosfos Yom Tov in the Durham, Perek Tes, he also quotes a Maharal that we don't have in the Sfarim. He says, I heard him in a drasha. Again, if you need a proof that the Maharal said other drashas, here it is. In the Durham Perek Tes, the Tosfos Yom Tov brings the Maharal that spoke in a drasha about why someone who Chas v'Shalom gives over other Yidden to the government, he's called Masur. Why isn't he called Moiser? the verb. Why Musr? Says the Tesi Yomtiv, I heard from my Rebbe in a drasha that since the Kadosh Baruch Hu will retaliate on such an Avera immediately, so the one who's Meiser will backfire upon him and he'll be given over. And that's called Musr. But that does not appear in any of Sifrei Maharal. It appears in some drasha, which again we don't have a recording of. And he speaks about the limit of the Mishnayos is that the Jewish, it brings out so beautifully that what does Mishnah do? Mishnah is where the Torah is concise and put together, and the Jewish people and Torah mirror each other. When we're in Golus, the Torah is, Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos, Lo tematza alocha brura u'mishnah brura b'makom echad. There won't be one that knows it all. One knows halacha, one knows agarta. Says, well, you know why? Because Am Yisrael and Torah mirror each other. And when you have one, if one of them is dispersed, the others also dispersed. In Jewish Torah, the Maharal adds, how come in Matan Torah we were ki'ish echad b'lev echad? Why? We were totally united. Why? Says the Maharal, because the Torah and Am Yisrael mirror each other. And since in Matan Torah, the whole Torah was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, lock, stock, and barrel, in the most unified way, it had to be that the Jewish people will reciprocate with total unity. Ki'ish echad b'lev echad. And that's where he picks out Mishnayos. Mishnayos makes, that's like the Geula will come if people are going to start learning Mishnayos. Yeah.
Now, something else about this drasha, as I recall, we were supposed to do this podcast last year, by the way, for listeners, but we didn't end up working out. So I recall you told me that this in this drasha is the only time the Maharal quotes his Rebbeim.
Absolutely. He doesn't quote them by name. He speaks about Birkas Kohanim and mentions a few diyukim of Birkas Kohanim, and he says, "Bekach kibalti mi Rabosai." We don't, as far as I know, we don't have a clue what it means. And kibalti mi Rabosai does not sound that he took it from a sefer, rather than he heard it from his Rebbeim. Now we do know that there were sperm that influenced the Maharal. Avodas HaKodesh of Meir Gabai. In the beginning of the Be'er Revi and Be'er Agola, he lists the Sfarim of Kabbalah that he's relying on. But to point out to a certain individual and to say he was my Rebbe, we don't have that. And Derech Chaim, for example, when he speaks about the Derech HaLimud, that people, the way we learn today, which he was very, very much against, that people kvetch, they don't cover ground, they just want to get married to a daughter of a rich fellow. He calls it Bat Meizahav. And he says, and then I learned the Sefer Orchos Tzadikim, and I saw that he so much comes out against this Derech HaLimud. If I would have seen the Orchos Tzadikim earlier, it would have saved for me so much year. So it would have saved for me this agony that I also learned the way they did. And the point I want to bring out is the Maharal was one of the most deepest thinkers that we ever had. He said he changed his whole Derech HaLimud when he saw the Orchos Tzadikim in Shakafine. Like we look at the Sefer Orchos Tzadikim as a Musa Sefer with vowels. And it's like, you're going to change your whole life because of Orchos Tzadikim? The Maharal did. And he was saying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chaval, I didn't see the Sefer earlier. So we do know Sfarim that influenced them, but who are the live Rabbeim that he had? We don't know.
But at least we see here he says something from his Rebbeim. We don't know otherwise. Now, again, there's more here that we're not going to get to, but just if there's anything else you want to say, or if not, how does he end the drasha?
About speaking about Mashiach and how Malchus Revis, which means the Western world, will be misbatel, and how and again this drasha really goes from the beginning of Mamash from other Rishon to Bias Mashiach Tzidkenu. And in the Lamed Beis, which is the last Inyan of this drasha. Inyan Lamed Aleph is Malchus Reviz, and Inyan Lamed Bes Bitula Shel Malchus Reviz. It will be nullified. The beautiful concepts here. And then he speaks about Am Yisrael will become one through the Mashiach, and that's how he started the drasha with Achdus, Hashem Echad, and so on, and he ends the drasha that through Mashiach, Am Yisrael will become one aguda. And again, Hashem lemelech kol haaretz, vayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad. He started with Achdus, and he ends the drasha with Achdus. Now, go ahead.
No, I was going to mention about the Sefer generally, but the Sefer itself, with your footnotes, famous footnotes, is 550 pages. But then there's another 200 plus pages of the famous or maybe infamous index in the back. And we discussed this at length the last time. But I will just mention, but there is a lot here, a very big Sefer. But what you're saying is, we're recording this shortly before Purim, but this podcast is being posted because it was given a Shabbos HaGadol, not because it's Pesach Inyanim per se. So even though someone picks up the Sfarim store and sees Drush Shabbos HaGadol, this is not the Drush LePesach. For that, he has to go to Gvuras Hashem if he really wants someone who's looking for the Maharal on Pesach.
Again, 30% of the Sefer is Pesach. 30-40% about Korban Pesach, about Matzahs, about Yitzias Mitzrayim. But again, it's only 30%. That's true. The Sefer of the Maharal on Pesach is Gvuras Hashem. Absolutely. That's definitely true.
Now, you already mentioned this is the drasha, and this goes for all the drashas. So when we get to your next work that you're publishing and you're working on now, does differ stylistically from the other Maharal. So your work, your footnotes, and your work that you did it differ on the drasha at all from the other as far as the Maharal, or no?
No, from that point of view, the cross references are the same because he is repeating the same many Yesodis which appear in his other Sfarim. Again, he's presenting it in a little bit more accessible way, but it's the same good old Maharal, without a doubt.
Now, as we mentioned, so this one on the spine, it says Aleph. It is the only drasha, as we mentioned on Shabbos HaGadol. This is the whole thing. It says Aleph because next you're doing Drush al Torah. You can already tease and mention here, and then it's on Shabbos Shuvah. What's the fourth? And then there's, I think, a fourth one, right?
There's 5 drashas. Volume Aleph is Drush Shabbos HaGadol. Volume Bet is Drush al Torah before Shavuos. In Mitzvah Hashem, it's coming out in a few months. Baruch Hashem, it's volume number 40 of the Sefer Maharal. So it's moving a milestone. And then volume Gimel will be the 3 smaller drushes. Drush al Torah, Drush al Mitzvahs, which he said also in the same shul, but it's a different topic. But it's a smaller one, Drush al Mitzvahs, Drush Shabbos Tshuva, and a Hesped that the Rav said on Rabbi Akiva Ginsburg. I'm sure I'm going to have to make research who this Choshev Yid was, that the Rav said a beautiful Hesped about him. And the Hesped, he doesn't speak about the Nifter per se, but he speaks about how we Jews look at death.
So, as you mentioned, next one is Al Torah, and that'll be out soon. And then you said, so Shabbos Shuvah, that's the next one. That's you working on that. What do you work? That's the next one.
That will be after Pesach. Will be the third volume, which is Shabbos Shuvah, Jerusalem Mitzvahs, and the Hesped.
So we should just mention Gvuras Hashem. I think you finished it a few years ago, not pretty recently, and that's the Sefer on Pesach. I don't know if I just want to mention it here. We're not doing an episode of Gvuras Hashem. Maybe Mr. Hashem will do one day an episode on Gvuras Hashem. We should really do episodes on each specific Sefer of the Maharal, and even then we're just, like you said, it's like a tip of the iceberg. We're not mentioning, but you can just mention Gvuras Hashem because this is being released close to Pesach time.
Right. The Gvuras Hashem is 6 volumes. The 5 volumes are the Sefer itself, which are 72 prakim and 2 appendixes, and then a nice fat volume for the index. It could be I'm a little bit overdoing it with the index, but I was always thinking, you know what? If you have a very big fat telephone book, But if I want to look up for Nachi Weinstein, I'll find it. So what if there's another million names? Maybe I'm a little bit overdoing it. It could be.
What's a telephone book?
The fact that no one else does it may indicate that I'm wrong.
No, but it is there. So now, if anyone's interested in learning Maharal studying on Pesach, so can you talk about that though here, like the Haggadah, the Maharal? So not about the of Yudel Rosenberg's infamous, not Maharal Haggadah that was not the Maharal, but Maharal. There is Maharal Haggadah today. So people pick up the one that Maharal Lapiansky published. That Haggadah, that's just Gvuras Hashem that taken out and put on Haggadah.
Gvuras Hashem from Perek Nun Aleph to Perek Samach Dalet is going through the Haggadah, mamish from beginning to end. So you could take that on its own and print it, and some people do it. It's called Haggadah Shel Pesach, the Maharal, and that is just again the Prakim and Gvuras Hashem from Perek Nun Aleph to Perek Samach Dalet or Samach Hey to Perek Samach Hey. I'm sorry. The Haggadah Shel Pesach that was published, as you said before, that we know it's called Divrei Negidim. That's one way how to call it. And Divrei Negidim, and there's another name for it. And that we know is, unfortunately, is probably not authentic. There's a lot of funny things added there, that the Maharal wore a kittel, and these kind of things that really, I don't think we could rely on it. Because, but he did rely, whoever did this Haggadah Shel Pesach, 90% is quoting the Prakim and Gvuras Hashem. That's what he's quoting. But the 10% that he's not quoting Gvuras Hashem, that's a question. Where's the source coming from?
And as I mentioned, the Haggadah, I think now going a lot of farms to see like Haggadah Maharal Prague. I think it was Maharal Lapiansky, right? Grumman, I think, put out that one, and then also your Gvuras Hashem. So your Gvuras Hashem, you can buy just that volume. Is that in one volume? You can buy it separately.
Again, I have it here. It's in. If could you buy it just on its own out of the other volumes? I'll tell you the truth. I don't know the answer. I first don't know. Then you got to speak to the store keepers. Could they sell just one volume out of a set? I first don't know the answer. You see,
okay.
We're doing this only for Ruchnias, Nachi. So the Maisa, how does it sell? What does it sell? Then I don't know.
Okay, listen. I'll say like this, listeners. If I can find it, I'm gonna make a note. If I can find it that it's sold separately, I'll try to link to the volume of Gvuras Hashem. I'm also going to try to. I'm also linked to the Drasha Shabbos HaGadol, but that's definitely sold separately in the Svarim stores. You can get that, and if I find, like I said, the other. I know, not promoting other products besides for your own. You said you're doing it for Ruchnis. I know that other one, that Eshel publication around the Piansky Post, that's the Maharal Haggadah. I think you know what I'm talking about, the blue cover. That one is also, I think, taken from Gvuras. I think that is taken from Gvuras, and they put on the Haggadah.
Rabbi Lupiansky did again. He did the whole Sefer Gvuras Hashem. Not only the Haggadah, but there's one volume which is just the Haggadah, and then there's another one that was done by Rabbi Zalman Rosenberg. By the colonel of Reb Mendel Brachvel, they did a tremendous avodah. And again, just the Haggadah part. But it means the Prakim of Gvuras Hashem. And that, of course, is 100% authentic.
Okay. So with that, if anyone is, we cover a lot of not a lot, but some of the Shabbos HaGadol Derasha. If you want to read more, like I said, I'll put a link to the Sefer, but it is available, and it should be available in like most any store.
You're such a young person. How does all this firm interest you? I'm serious. I'm amazed. Like I'm unfortunately Maharal. Okay, other things unfortunately do not interest me enough. But how do you have an interest in so many different areas?
It's a good question. I find it interesting. I will say, unfortunately, the Maharal, I haven't really learned. I don't know if I said this last time. Maybe I told this to you off air. I don't know if I told this. I haven't really learned much Maharal. I have Sfarim with the Maharal, but I haven't gone through Chidush HaGadas. Chidush HaGadas I've looked at. We talked last time about you when you're going to work Chidush HaGadas. That I've looked at. The other Sfarim of the Maharal, I haven't gone through. I know of the Maharal, of course. I try to read up a little bit about the Maharal.
So, but you have an interest, Baruch Hashem, in many, many things, which is beautiful. Here, since we're doing a Zoom, the two of us, I want to show you that here is a Tfus Rishon of Netzach Yisrael. This came out in the Maharal's lifetime. And the reason why I bought it is, I don't know if I mentioned in the previous conversation, Rav Moshe Zatzal told me, there's a big Indian to have a Tfus Rishon of a giant. And he told me why. First of all, in those days, they didn't print 1,000 or 2,000 copies. They printed 50. So probably the Gadol looked into each copy. And B'nasal Bo'enam, so the Gdushas Chal on the original one, a giant could be the Maharal, the Goyen, the Ramchal, the Arizal, and others. But he told me the following story that he heard from his father. When there was the story of the Dibuk between the two wars, so there was a young girl, a 12-year-old girl, that an neshama entered her system, and the Chofetz Chaim and Reb Chanan Wasserman were trying to get the Dibuk out of this girl. And when they started, it wasn't in Radim, but it was nearby Radim. And once, when the Chofetz Chaim and Reb Chanan started to speak to the Dibuk said, I cannot talk because there's a holy sefer in this room. I'll talk only once you remove that sefer out. It was a small book, a bookshelf, but they don't know which sefer it was. And they asked, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it that one? Till they reach Sefer Tzniusa with the beer of the Vilna Gaon. They took out that sefer out of the room. Rav Moshe Zatzal's father told him this, and then the Dibuk had no problem. The next day, the Yeshiva Brachim were very curious, decided let's put in a second edition of the Sefer Tzniusa of the Gaon. Will the Dibuk still make a machal or not? Something was printed not by Reb Chaim Volozhiner, like the first one, but 50, 60 years later. Again, most people probably would run away as far as they could if the Dibuk's in the room. That's what I would do. Because also the local rabbi, whatever the city was, started asking the Dibuk questions, and the Dibuk says, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the Chofetz Chaim and Reb Chanan, not to you. So it was like scary. But they put in a second edition of Sefer Tzniusa with Biur Agra at night when this story went on for 2-3 days. And they put in that one, and the Dibuk did not make a macha anymore. So Rav Moshe Shapiro told me that he learned from that story that it's very important to have in your house a source of bracha, a tfus rishon of one of these giants. You can find some which are not that expensive. This Netzach Yisrael one costed $700. Okay.
And I'm sure that's before today's explosion in the auction market. I mean, the auction has beloved your comment, I'm sure, because this is really everyone should go buy a tfus rishon.
That's what Moshe told me. Make a point, and you know what happened as a result of that? The Chabur then finished Pirkei Avos with Moshe with Biur Agra, and we gave him a matana, the first edition of Biur Agra and Pirkei Avos, and he was so thrilled with that that he had a tfus rishon from the Vilna Gaon, or his Talmudim that published it, with the first edition. So that's a big Indian.
Is that the only first edition Maharal that you own, the Netzach Yisrael?
No, that I have. My brother Ari Bergman has all of them.
Right, I meant you personally, yeah, not we. I meant you personally. Yeah.
There was a story with the Gur Aryeh. Maybe I mentioned it. When I finished the Gur Aryeh, this goes back about 30 years ago, out of nowhere, someone called me up and brought me a Gur Aryeh Tfus Rishon and said, you can have it. It cost $1,500, which was a mitzvah, because it's much, much thicker than the Netzach Yisrael. And I was then in Avrech, and I just bought an air conditioner for my wife 2 weeks earlier in the kitchen, which cost also $1,500. I did have the photocopy of the Tfus Rishon, but I didn't have the Tfus Rishon. So I was contemplating, I was in Avrech, another $1,500. I don't have the money. After 3-4 days, I gave it back. On the title page was written on the top of the title page in handwriting, the pasuk Yemin Hashem Romema, Yemin Hashem Oisachayil. 2 dots over the first letter, Yud, and 2 dots over the last letter, Lamed. I returned it back to the Judaica man. The next week, they discovered, I don't know how, that was the private copy of the Maharal himself. And the Yud Lamed that's the initials of his name, Yud Liboy. And it went up from 1,500 to 25,000 overnight. And every time I pressed the button of the air conditioner, from then on, I said, it's because of you that I missed the first reading of the Maharal's private collection.
That's an amazing story. It didn't say that last time, as far as I recall.
I'm sure I could have spoken like send it my way because that's what I finished. So why not? Here it is, and it was a bit $1,500. But then
forget the Maharal's own signature. That is, and forgetting that this was a while ago, not today's prices. And that's very cheap.
It's very cheap, but again, it's very cheap. It's about 5 times the width of Netzach Israel.
Yeah, listeners can't see the video, but the Netzach Israel is very small, very slim in the original.
Yeah. Listen, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does with that always. He brings us opportunities, and with our free will we take advantage of it or not? I blew it there.
Wow, that's a real story. So, all right, listen, I will, like I said, anyone interested in the Shabbos HaGadol Derasha, they can find it in the Svarim source. I'll put a link. I'll try to find the word Hashem, Haggadah, etc. And listen, I want to hear feedback from the listeners, please. I'm going to request that to email me if they're interested in hearing, if we, like I mentioned this, that we should do episodes on other Svarim of the Maharal, other specific Svarim. So if anyone wants to email me, let me know, Amrit Hashem, and then I'll convince Rav Hartman to come back.
But again, like last time, I'm more than happy to give my email address. But from our last podcast, I got about 400 emails. Okay, then it was also because of the booklet of the Guardian. My email address is JD, that stands for Joshua David, JD Hartman, HARTMAN, the digits 120 at gmail.com.
Last time. Sorry, listeners should email you as well. And last time you gave out that booklet, I don't know if you still have it, the offer still stands, but there was a booklet of the selected of people in Zion, right, where they could look for these certain selected Maharals, the Torah, the Gorariye. So
I'll be happy to give that one again, no problem. We didn't speak about the Gorariye tonight, but B'Simcha G'dayla, that's an offer. I would like to give to all your listeners a first print of Gurus Hashem or whatever, but that will be a little bit more expensive.
Exactly. Okay, so but definitely your listeners can reach out to you, and they should reach out to me if they're interested in trying to get again a specific. We'll see which one, but specific another Sefer Maharal, another episode of Maharal, because there's so much to talk about the Maharal. And thank you very much for coming back on the podcast and to talk about the Drasha Shabbos HaGadol.
Nachi, it's a real pleasure. I mamish enjoy it, and you should keep on being Mabritz Torah, the Hagdil Torah Uladira.
Amen.